Hello, welcome, welcome. We're going to give people a few seconds to join in. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be starting soon. All right, I'm going to get us in and started on this webinar. So thank you so much for joining our webinar on automating change management workflows. If you have any questions throughout, please add them directly to the chat, making sure that you send the question to everyone and not just host and panelists. We will be addressing questions a bit throughout and also at the end during a Q&A. And I'm going to hand this off to Nellie Wartoff. She will be presenting today, and she's the CEO of Tigerhall.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Great to see all of you here. A big welcome to this chat on how are we automating change management workflows. I'm keeping the chat open throughout the session, so feel free to input your comments, thoughts, questions, and anything that you want me to bring up throughout this. We're going to chat about automation, and invariably it will be quite a bit of AI as well. I know they're not completely the same thing, but they overlap in quite a few areas. So there will be a bit of AI chat. There's no way to get around that in 2025. So that will be part of this as well. We're going to cover 5 core change management workflows and how we can do those faster and better. And I added in this subtitle here to free up time for what's truly human. Because usually when I speak about these things, the reaction I get many times, like, oh, we need humans, like it's such a human practice and it should be more human. We shouldn't just automate everything away. And my point of view on this is that we actually do this to make time for what is human. So, because I don't think it's human to chase IT for an email distribution list or spend hours and hours drafting an email that nobody opens. So that's not what makes us human, right? So let's focus on what does make us human, and then we can automate the rest. So looking at where do we spend time today in the classic change management workflows, it doesn't really matter which model you use. If you're an ADKAR, Cotter, or whatever you're applying in your practice, you still have to do most of these areas, right? You need to align stakeholders, many times taking most of your time is aligning those difficult stakeholders, planning the communications, you need to train people, you need to reinforce the message. So any kind of change curve that you follow, these areas will be there. And for many, taking weeks and weeks and weeks. And then you end up having to report on it, putting together that analysis. The reporting is also going into hundreds of hours that is spent on this, right? So if we take a more granular look at these workflows, this is what it looks like for most organizations. If we take those boxes and break them down to one level below. So you have weeks being spent on initially just designing the plan, like what is it that we're supposed to do, thinking about the strategy. A lot of time going into content creation, creating materials, talking points for executives. I was having dinner with a chief transformation officer a couple of months ago who said she probably spends between 50 to 60% of her time on comms. And she's a chief transformation officer for an organization with 7,000 people. So it doesn't really escape anyone, these drafting talking points for executives. And then chasing them for the recordings, town halls, messages, all the content production processes. That takes a lot of time. I know people who spend a week on setting up email distribution lists and many times having to liaise with IT when doing this, setting up SharePoint sites and so on. And then again, more content creation, content delivery, all those live sessions, the trainings, then you need to gather feedback. There's a lot of one-to-ones involved, analyzing that feedback, repurposing content, reinforcing over and over again. So if we add all of this up, it's between 22 to 55 weeks that it ends up taking to just get a change initiative off the ground, right? And launching it. And many times 2 to 10 people in the team. And adding all of this up is around 297 man-hour weeks. So if we take the average, say an FTE cost of 100K to make it simple, this is 6 years. So this is 6 years times 1 FTE, that's $600,000 per initiative launch. That is just going in FTE cost and FTE time. And I believe this is underestimated because we also have the consulting costs on top of this. We have the different content creation agencies that you might liaise with. You might have someone doing translation somewhere. You might have different tools that you're paying to do all of these different things. So $600,000 per launch is actually an underestimate. When we look at the total cost of ownership for a total initiative, many times comes up to $30–40 million if it's a large enterprise-wide organization-wide initiative. So it is expensive. So let's start with a poll. We've got around 70 people in the room. So let's see, where do you spend most of your time today? And you can select between stakeholder management, communications, training, reporting, or something else. I like that distinguish, Robert, that's good. Mechanics discipline, yeah. All right, we have 53 responses in, another 20 to go. This is interesting. Yeah, very, very aligned with what I see in my conversations as well. Actually, in the change my workflow sounds like task for communication. Assuming this is also applicable to large organizations, is it not more prudent to collaborate with a communications partner? That's a very good question, Helen. And many times people do collaborate with internal comms, but still people in change and transformation end up spending a very, very large portion of their time on comms. And I hear many stories where internal comms are not as collaborative either, like they don't really want to help change and transformation, and they're like, oh, we're doing like the BAU comms, and like you do your own comms. So I see it varying very different between different organizations depending on the relationship you have with internal comms, the resources they have, and the setup. And if we look at this poll, right, communications out of this group, so we have 70 people in this group in the room today, and 37% of you, or 37% say communications is where you spend the most time. So even within just change management as a practice, it is a lot of time being spent on comms. And when I look at our Tigerhall customers and people that I speak with and members in the ECLC and so on, communications tend to be a very heavy portion of it. So while it's important to make the distinction that change management isn't comms and comms isn't change management, and many people think change management is send an email and it's done, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth. But the thing is, within doing change management, communications ends up being a very, very large part of it. So looking at the stakeholder management being a very big piece, and then communications, not so much on training, very little on reporting. Only one of you, one person in the room says that reporting is where you spend the most time. And then some people say other. We have 8 people saying other. For those of you who say other, what is in that other bucket that you see? Sorry, review cycles, sign-off time. Exactly, that's a very good point, Leslie. Corp comms usually don't have the skill set for communicating change. They're very good with sending out the BAU emails, but when it comes to driving behavior change, BAU emails is not what drives behavior change at all, and we all know that. Impact assessment, that's a good one, Kate. That takes a lot of time too. Very manual. Okay. Great. So let's look across some of these and see how can we save some time and get into what's more human. So this is fairly aligned with, if we're looking across a broader group than who's in the room now, it tends to be around 28% of time goes into, it says communications drafting here, but think like comms in general, right? So coming back to that point, how big of a portion of change management comms is. Stakeholder management, stakeholder updates, keeping people aligned. I spoke with someone a couple of weeks ago that does 62 one-to-ones per week. That's how he manages his change initiatives. He has 62 different stakeholders, and the only way to move forward is to catch up with them every single week. So stakeholder engagement takes a lot of time. Data consolidation reporting, not as high in this group. So this group is more towards the first two. Training, project admin. So the project admin portion here is probably where that like change impact assessment in those areas come in. But adding this up roughly, it's about 70% of the time that is spent on tasks that could be moved faster and like partially or fully automated with the help of automation and also AI. And what we're solving for here, right, again, is to move from the busy work to where is our time best spent. So more human-led interaction. So things like manual data gathering and all of this repetitive communications creation, those are the things that we want to remove. And where do we want to spend time instead is on deeper stakeholder engagement and course correction and making sure that we're doing things that have an impact. So that's the point here. So the point is not to automate everything away and just do nothing and chill and go to the beach, even though that might be what some of us like to do as well. But it's more around how can we go deeper rather than being stuck in all of this busy work across Excel, email, and SharePoint and everything else that we're doing daily. But before we go into these five, it's very important to think about this from a remove, automate, enhance point of view, because many people move straight into, okay, what can we automate? Where can we use AI, this and that? But many things maybe you shouldn't do at all. Maybe you should just remove them entirely. So before going into outlining all your processes and looking at where you spend the time and where does that go at the moment, think about it first from what should we just stop doing? What should we remove entirely? And I think sending emails, for example, might be one of those. Like the average internal open rate on emails tend to be 7-8%. Is it worth your and your team's time to spend so much time on drafting emails when nobody even opens it? So that's one example of a workflow that maybe should be, if not entirely removed, maybe reduced. But thinking about it from the angle of what could we just stop doing? And I like talking about anti-pilots, where you stop doing something for 3 months and see what happens. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe people realize that, yeah, this was not where time was well spent, for example. So try some anti-pilots, outline everything you're doing at the moment, what you stop, start, continue, try stopping things for 3 months and just see what happens. And then those are the things you can remove. Because there's no point to automate things that aren't effective, right? Like we want to automate things that are working, that are good, that are effective, not just automating for the sake of automating. And then also looking at what are the processes and workflows that we want to make more human, where we want to go deeper into, right? Because you might not want to automate an interaction with your CEO, for example. Like that might be where you want to go deeper and truly understand the strategy and spend more time. So think about where do you want to go deeper with more personal touch, more emotional intelligence, and maybe those are the ones that you don't automate. But the things in the middle, the things that you don't want to remove, but you also don't want to go deeper, those are the flows that are more prime for automation that you can start looking at. But yeah, first decide if it should exist at all, and then if it maybe needs more human judgment than you're giving it today, and then we can start automating. Not sure what you mean about being able to automate my emails. So I think like with Ron, to answer your question, when we think about what we should remove, for example, in change management, it's a lot about like sending emails as comms. And is that something that you want to automate to just send more and more and more emails? Maybe not. Maybe that's not the effective way to drive change management, right? To just bombard people's inboxes with more emails. So that's an example of something that you might want to reduce or remove entirely instead of just automating. Because automating speeds things up, right? But not all places are good with more speed and more automation. So I don't think anyone on this call wants to receive more emails, for example. Like that's not the key, right? So that's what I mean by that. Okay, so what we're going to look at are 5 workflows. So we're going to look at stakeholder management. A lot of you spend time there. We're going to look at change communications. So again, this is focused on communications for change management, not like internal comms, BAU. Automating emails is like, how do we do better change communications? The training and support and the just-in-time delivery, so the distribution of everything that you're doing. Then the analysis and reporting, and then we're going to cover some red flags and how you can get started. So let's dive into the first of these. So for those of you who said that stakeholder management is where you spend most of your time, I think it was about 40% of you that said this is the number one place where you spend time. How much of your time do you currently spend on stakeholder management? You can put a percentage in the chat. Like, is this 50% of your time? Is it 10% of your time? Give us an idea in the chat for those of you who said this is your number one. Samia spends 10%, 60%. So quite a wide variety from 10 to 60. Yeah, depending on phase of project, that's a good addition, Rachel. It tends to vary a lot. 80% for Anastasia. Okay. So quite a lot of differences in how much time goes into here. And I assume, yeah, based on Rachel's comment as well, like different depending on phase of project and probably type of project as well. So how can we do this a little bit smarter? Because the problem here is that it's so many manual touch points, right? And like that example that I gave of someone doing 62 one-to-ones a week, and everything is individual one-to-one updates. Many times, especially senior stakeholders, they want to feel cared for in a certain way, and that's why they need that one-to-one attention. They want to be treated in a certain way. There are politics coming into this, or corporate intelligence, as Hardeep that I had on my podcast called it. How do you do corporate intelligence, aka politics? A lot of duplicated effort saying the same thing to people over and over again, and then the information that you get from them, right, tend to be across different. You may have some notes, some recordings. It's not really systemized. So you have all of the stakeholder information, but it's across so many different places, and it's really hard to do something with. So some of the things we can do here, they're a little bit smarter, is how many of you already like transcribe, summarize, work with your one-to-one meetings or stakeholder meetings in general? Few of you already do this. Got a thumbs up? 2? Yes, one-to-one meetings? Okay. So I think it counted like 3. Yeah, 3 Copilot, 2 thumbs. Okay, so you do that. That's probably most. I mean, blocked apps, yeah, that's difficult as well. So starting with transcribing and summarizing, then how many of you have tried ChatGPT projects or Copilot projects, like from a structure point of view? Do any of you use ChatGPT projects or something similar for the centralized tracking? No? So this is one thing that I recommend on this that is very effective. So when you think of stakeholders, you say you have 15 stakeholders in a particular initiative, right? What you can do, and I use ChatGPT as an example here, but whichever AI application you use, you might have similar ones in Copilot or Claude, or depending on which tool you're using. You have something called projects. And the benefit of projects is that you can organize and bring all of this together in one place. So one thing you could do is to have one project per stakeholder, and every single interaction you have with a stakeholder, all your meeting recordings, your transcripts, your notes, everything, you dump it into this project about the particular stakeholder. And then what you can do is that project becomes like, it learns everything about what you're adding to that project. You can add over time. So if you have a one-to-one every week with a certain stakeholder, keep adding the transcript of those one-to-ones, and then you can go and chat with it, right? Like just like you chat with an LLM in any way. But you can chat with it and ask, hey, send me 3 follow-up questions that I should ask the stakeholder, or send me an impact assessment of how this change is impacting them, or anything that you want out for this particular stakeholder, you can get out of these projects. So as long as you centralize it and have it in these specific folders or maps, you can just record it, have AI process it, and then you can work with that. So, and then you can also connect these different projects. So if you have say like 10 projects, 10 different stakeholders, you can actually get then what are the interdependencies and how are these stakeholders relating to each other? What are their concerns? What is maybe like just one person's concerns? You can get a lot of different outputs from these. But the project view, or like the project way of working with it, enables you to have that continuous conversation with it and keep working with it. There's a tool Sandy recommends called Shibumi. Is that similar? It does provide data visualization as well, Leslie. Yeah, it does. So you can get like I would say it's limited. Like in my experience, the data visualization is limited. It does provide it, but it's not as good as I would like it to be. But it does work. So that's one. So for example, what you could do, this is one that I was speaking to was doing this. They had a CRO, and they were doing this like go-to-market overhaul and changes, and they added 3 things to the project. So this again, like you don't need a lot, like you don't need massive. The more data, the better, obviously. But this one, she added a 30-minute executive strategy session, and again, these are meeting recordings, right? 45-minute sales team alignment discussion, and then a customer feedback compilation. And then that led to the output that she could get from this project was an impact map. So they can visualize what are the dependencies between all of these different areas. and what is the alignment, and then also content needs. So like, what are the communication needs? What do we need to communicate to who, the training, and so on. So the more information, obviously, the better output. But even with just these three, this change management leader was about to get these out of it just from adding these three. So there's quite a lot you can start working with, and especially over time, if you have especially stakeholders that you have weekly one-to-ones with, right? A lot of things that you can get from them over time. So that's one thing you can do on stakeholder automation. Now, change communications. Same question here is about like another 40% of you that spent a lot of your time on comms. Could you put in the chat, which part of comms do you spend most of your time on? What is the time-consuming part of driving change communications? Planning? Approval processes, yeah. Many say approval process, that's interesting. Resources. Tailoring for different audiences. Getting people engaged with it. Review cycle. Yeah, a lot of really good answers. Matching media with the audience. Exactly. Yeah, all the coordination, the planning. It's interesting how approvals take so much on. Like, it's even like in that earlier timeline I had, it's like an item on its own, right? Because just getting approvals is so time consuming. And then you get to the very last step and someone is not approving it, and then you have to go back to step one already. So if we look at comms then, some of the challenges, of course, mass communications, like same message to everyone. And a lot of you mentioned that in the chat as well, that it's not specific to specific audiences. How do we tailor it? How do we tailor to what's in it for me? All of those emails going out left, right, and center. Leadership communications many times can be disconnected from the change narrative. Also not really great. So many times we're seeing very low engagement. Some of you mentioned that as well. And a lot of time in just like the drafting of comms as well. And when it comes to approval processes, there are a lot of things that you can automate there as well in terms of like when it's getting sent to the next person for approval and so on. And we'll get to that a little bit later in the data triggers and how you can connect different data sources to actually trigger these automations as well. But if we start with looking at the personalization aspect, because this is where it differs greatly from internal comms, right? Like internal comms is more mass broadcasting and just send the same thing to everyone. It's a message that everyone needs to know. It's information. It's something you need to get out, and you can send that to everyone. And this is why sometimes collaborating with internal comms, depending on how that team works and who they are, is usually not the best idea, because many times what internal comms do tend to be the very opposite of what actually drives behavior change and what drives change forward. So if we look at personalization, this is, again, where AI comes in and does a really, really good job in personalizing. So having source documents, and what I recommend here is having as many documents as you can. So it can be like meeting notes, strategy decks, different policy documents, or tech documents. And what people sometimes miss here is it doesn't have to be source documents of the same format. It doesn't have to be 3 PowerPoint decks, right? You can combine a town hall, and then it can be a customer call, and it can be an annual report, and like it can be any kind of source documents coming together that gives it actually a lot more context, and then personalizing it by the different segments. So having these different persona types and creating these persona types ones where it's what do they care about, what do they need to know, and what is generally what they are caring about in a change initiative, right? And this is where you can look at historic data as well. What did they care about the last time? Most people tend to care about the same things over and over again. So if they care about data compliance, that's important to them. If they care about job security, that tends to be important for them regardless of the initiative. So you can learn these things about the audiences and then personalizing it to them. And something that works really well is to leverage executives' voices or managers' voices as well, where people tend to listen more to many times their immediate manager, if they have a good relationship, or like the department head, and being able to emulate their voice, their terminology, their tones, like how they talk, because it's very different, especially if you have a blue collar audience and a central headquarter white collar audience, right? Like even that might be very different terminology and speak. So being able to leverage different people's voices. And it's interesting we were just looking at Q1 and Q2 data from Tigerhall, and when we compare AI generated content with human generated content, AI generated content outperforms. It does much better in both open rate, completion rate, engagement rate, impact across the board. And I think the reason for that is the personalization, because when you do human created, it is very hard to personalize to the same level as you can when you can do it with AI. And the way that AI personalizes to your vocabulary, to what you care about, and how it learns about you is what drives that personalization that I think leads to that kind of content performing better. So if we look at an example of doing this, right, like if you take a like change management deck, simpler terms for like whatever deck you have for like an initiative, and that could be, so you have this 42 slide strategic overview, there might be some technical jargons, like one size fits all messaging, and then having the AI for content transformation, having the vocabulary, using people's words. This is where you can add, say, like team meetings. So if you have a team meeting of where people talk and using the terminology that they use internally, having that added to it, then it will pick up those same words, so that people hear the kind of language that they're used to, not only in geographical language, but also in the terminology and vocabulary that they use in the team. So an example of this would then be how frontline operation gets more like practical how-tos, more like video demos, very short, action-focused. Finance might want it more data-rich, so more metrics focused, more ROI kind of messaging inside. And then executive leadership probably needs a more big picture, right? So more strategic overview, KPI summary, and so on. So, and this is what you can feed your audience personas with. So you can already tell the personas, like this is what matters to them. And then from just one single source, you can create all of this at the same time. The question from Kate, can you share any recommendations for effective prompting? Yes. So what I recommend here on prompting is when you do the audiences, right? So be very specific with, like, you map out the audiences into like what they care about, what their history is, what their key metrics are. Like you tell it like the titles of that, and then you have that feed into your prompt for creation. So you can link it to specific audience descriptions, and the more specific those descriptions are around those, especially headlining it and having like almost bullet points is what seems to work best for prompting as well. And then telling what is the outcome, what do you want them to walk away with. I see a lot of people missing this in prompt. They say like, oh, like summarize the key items for a sales audience, for example. But that's not the point. The point is not to summarize it. The point is, what do you want the salespeople to think or to walk away with? Like, what is the message? And I see many still missing that. So instead of saying summarize this for salespeople, say, I want salespeople to take away that the way that we interact with customers is very important because of A, B, and C. That's the key message. And then you add below that, this is the audience and what they care about. So focus on outcomes, focus on learning objectives, for example, is another good one to insert, but include that in your prompt, like what do you actually want them to take away, not just what you want the AI to do. That's the biggest difference that I see. Okay, training and support then, the reinforcement, making sure people understand what is expected of them. Very few of you spend a lot of time here. I think just like 7 or 8 of you, that was this like number one. So for all of you, when you look at training and support, is this something that you do yourselves? And if so, where does your time go? Or is it something that your L&D colleagues take on and you don't really touch? Feel free to let me know in the chat. The trainer, L&D, but there's a disconnect. For those of you who do it yourselves in the change team, what do you spend your time on? L&D often too busy. Part of the project change team. And that's good then that the L&D team are members of the change team. Corp Coms partnership. Okay, so a bit of both. So when we look at training, if you're doing it as a change team or together with L&D, the problems that I hear mostly about in the space is that it's very static, right? It's like you set something up in the LMS and then it doesn't change it for the next 6 months. So very static, kind of one size fits all experiences, takes a lot of time to produce. Actually, know a large tech company that has 160 people working on just creating training materials, 160 people. So there is a lot of time that goes into just material creation. Like that could be PowerPoint, could be PDF, could be videos, and so on. And then many that are reliant on vendors as well. So if you don't have an internal L&D team or there is that disconnect, many also bring in external vendors, sometimes like big four consultants that run around doing workshops, and then that slows you down as well and tends to have very, very low engagement. So some of the things that we can look at here is instead of applying like an education lens to this, which I think is one of the biggest problems, that people approach change management or the training part of change management as an education project or like a course. But the thing is, it's too fast moving for that to work, right? You cannot create a 6-month course and for people to then like adapt and get the capabilities that way. It needs to be a different lens than a traditional L&D education lens. And I think that's why we're seeing so much disconnect between change management teams and learning teams, because it's very different operating styles, it's very different pace, and just like what we need to learn for change to happen is many times different from that education mindset that many people in L&D has. So the way to look at this, and again, we come back to AI processing, and I know this is applied in a lot of cases, but it is very useful and it does speed things up, which is why, especially in creating content, communications, training, it does come up again. So what do we want to do here? Some good things that work, again, coming back to that outcome. So to Kate's question earlier on prompting, speaking about learning outcomes, what do you actually want people to do? And this is where you can add to whatever AI processing tool you use, add what do you want them to actually do differently, and also tell the processing what are they doing today. So today, if you take the sales team example again, my sales team are doing X today, I want them to do Y. This is the context, add all of your documents, whatever, and then telling them this is the change that I want to see. So being very specific with I want them to move from A to B, that is what will help the AI processing be more effective. And then combining that with the job role data. So who are they? What work do they do? What is their job role? Again, meeting transcripts, so a bit similar to comms, but those learning outcomes, the A versus B is important. And then you get how-to guides, you get those interactive flows, role-based cheat sheets. So again, combining that with a personalization. And this works especially well in technology implementation. So I highly recommend this if you're doing like an ERP implementation or any kind of tech or system upgrade that people need to do. If we take an example of an ERP rollout, for example, having even like the vendor demo recordings go into this, and like vendors always have a ton of technical demos, right? So you can just get all of their technical demos, any even demonstration they've done with you. They usually have a ton of product documentation. So ask for all of that product documentation. They usually have a support portal. So you can even ask them to like download and ship you the support portal or just like extract the support portal. And then any Q&A sessions and meetings that you've had with them as well. So when it comes to technology implementation, there is a lot of material. And there's still many that don't really use this, but start like from scratch in like from a process point of view, which is great as well. But there is a lot of information here that you can use. And just from inputting this, we had one that was able to get 12 role-specific how-to guides. So this comes back to linking it to the personas. Having those interactive process flows, different like decision trees, the role-based cheat sheets. So again, this is not about doing a 6-month course, right? This is about getting what do you need to do differently in your workflow tomorrow compared to what you did last week. That's it. People don't need a 6-month deep dive course in exactly how everything in Workday works, for example, if it's a Workday implementation, but just what do you need to know and what do you need to do differently? So get your hands on these things and then work with whatever AI processing you use. And these are the kind of things that you can get out from it. So tech implementation, very, very straightforward and effective to do this when it comes to training and reinforcement. which software are you using to generate the output? So there are different softwares you can use Risa. So you have different, depending on like which AI you use internally, which LLMs. You have tools like ChatGPT. You have different for different kind of formats. Tigerhall does all of this as well. So this is what we do in the platform. So you can dump all of these things and it generates all of this for your specific audiences. So different activation platforms and AI LLMs are available. And I have a slide later on different tools that you all can use as well. Now, coming to just-in-time delivery, this is actually where I think the by far biggest time save or the biggest outcome of automation is. And if we separate AI for a bit, right, like we've been talking a lot about AI so far, if we look at just pure automation and automation alone, it's the delivery that you have the biggest leverage for doing here. And when we say delivery, it's getting the right message to the right person at the right time, delivering all the training, all the communications, and so on. How are all of you doing this right now? So for those of you, so like delivery is where you spend a lot of time. Where does your time go in this area? Human validation, question Khaled. Yeah, it does take time, but takes a lot less time than creating it from scratch. Yeah, I highly recommend human validation, especially in the beginning. It's very important. Yeah, can share the links, Joanna. Manually and ad hoc, Maria. Getting right people in the right place. You spend manual time on chasing IT for distribution lists and these things. Or manual. Yeah, this is the area where I see most are still doing it very, very manual. Many people are still having to work with IT to get email distribution lists in place. And then by the time you've finished the email distribution list, something changes. And then timing it to when people need it is almost impossible, right, for doing this manually. So a lot of time sunk into dynamic distro list issues. Yeah, very, very few have a clean list in one system. Scheduling, that's a good one, Katie, as well. Month and close, like go live date, right? And then like the rush up to a go live date and all the training that needs to happen before then. Timing it to a real project plan. Yeah, this is tricky. So this is, out of all of these 5, this is my personal favorite because I think this is where you can actually save the most time as well. So problems here, right? Like information is sent out long before people need it. And we see this happening all the time. Like it's based on something going live and you send out everything according to the project timeline, but not necessarily according to user readiness. And everyone receives it at the same time. So you have 10,000 people receiving the same message at the same time instead of when do they actually need it. I think this is the biggest miss that we're making in change management in general, is we go so much from the project timeline and what needs to happen when, which is important, but it can be a lot more effective if people get it when they are actually ready for it. So you send out all this information and when everything is important, then nothing is important, right? And people's inboxes are just overloaded. And the people's ability to retain information and knowledge at the time when they didn't ask for it is almost close to zero. So if you look at, for example, delivering a workshop, delivering a training on, say we do that today, the retention of that knowledge next week is around 2%. So the hour you spend here with me now, you're going to remember 2% of this next week. So this is already not a good delivery mechanism, right? Like it would be even better if I could deliver nuggets of what I'm talking about today to you when you are sitting and having that exact problem. That would be 10 times more effective than having all of it being done right now, right? And that's something you can actually do in internal change management, is to get it right at that right time to ensure that people don't tune out. So instead of having all of the training happening in January for a system that goes live on 1st of Feb, and then people are going to use it over the next 11 months, how about delivering it at the time when people are actually using a particular part of the system? And this is where you can integrate with those workflows, especially if you're doing, again, like tech adoption tends to be the easiest because you have so much data to work with. So similar when we looked at the training and support and reinforcement example, if you're doing an ERP implementation or changing CRM system, very easy to integrate with that data. And then seeing when people are doing something in a system, having that data point trigger your enablement and your communications. So critical. So instead of having that 60-minute Microsoft Teams workshop training, have small, tiny bite-sized pieces delivered at exactly the time when someone is doing something in the new system, right? So sales is a good use case for this because CRM systems tend to be very widely used. And when a seller moves a deal stage, for example, and you've gone through a pricing change that you want them to apply at a certain stage, you can actually see, okay, this is when it's moved to the proposal stage, let's say, and then that's when the new pricing guidelines are sent out to them in real time as they're doing that workflow. So triggering it at that moment when they're taking that action is super key. So if we look at an example, if we take the ERP system example, you're doing an ERP implementation and you're changing the purchase order process, right? Instead of doing this like 60-minute training session and then you set up a SharePoint site with all of those PDF guides that no one is ever going to look at, and you're going to see a very high error rate because people are in it, they're doing it, they're not going to go to a SharePoint site in the middle of that, right? So can you instead deliver these micro reminders? So when someone is starting that new PO request process, they get this message or a bite-sized piece of information like, oh, approval threshold is changed to 5,000, orders above this amount require direct level approval. So this drastically reduces the time that you have to spend on training, the time that you have to spend on delivering these workshops and creating all of these materials, and compliance and change adoption increases massively. And what you need to be able to do this is to get access to that data, which is usually a fairly straightforward integration, especially if it's one of the larger systems, if you're using like a Workday, Oracle, SAP, or a Salesforce or something like that. You should be able to get access to that data and then be able to trigger the sending of that information when people are taking certain actions. And then you can completely remove all of that training schedule before go live. You can remove all of the communications, all of those email campaigns that you're planning, and just set up exactly and program it to what actions need what type of enablement. And then you set it up once and you let it run. And that's it. So this is where I think the biggest time saving is, and in combination with the highest change adoption. Because the change adoption when you're doing it just in time is much higher than receiving everything in January and then you start the performance management module in October, for example. So very key. See, how do you collect that trigger data in ERP? So depending on which ERP you use, but they all have open APIs. So getting access to data lakes, for example, which we'll talk about next when it comes to analysis and reporting, but having access to data lakes, having access to the open APIs of these systems and being able to connect them. And this is where we need to make friends in IT as change management professionals. But all of that data is there. And it's actually not that hard to access. And it's not necessarily confidential either. So just collecting all of that data is key. Can you say a bit more about how to leverage AI tools before the ERP triggers and other JIT automation? So is it like ERP implementation, Charles? Is that what you're referring to? Sometimes, so yes, the AI tools, the job is like, this is where you get the data in and then like setting up specific conditions. So the way that you program it, right, is like you set condition, if A happens, then B. So that's how you program it. And this is where you would need a connectivity platform or an activation platform or something that can work with this data. I use AI for creating the triggers. Yeah, so this is more automation. This is more automation than AI. There can have AI as parts of it, but it's more around how do you get that flow of like if A happens, then B. So if this person moves it, and you can even add in different audience conditions and segmenting them differently, right? So if you have a data lake where you have HRIS data and ERP data, and then you can say everyone who reports to Charles and is 4 levels below Charles and has started the performance management module in Workday, for example, then this should lead to this communication being triggered, for example. So that's how you connect. And so it's not so much AI involved in this as it is just things like process automation and connecting ABC. So that's on delivery. So if we look at analysis and reporting in this data, right, because both when it comes to AI, there are a lot of good solutions that work with unstructured data. When it comes to automation, you need that connectivity, getting access to data lakes. So looking at analysis in general across change management, it tends to be issues around having a lot of manual surveys, so very time consuming to create those, distributed, and then very slow as well. I mean, if you have an issue, for example, happening in week 1, then you send out a survey in week 3, which I would say is fast. I know many organizations that send a survey a year or like once a quarter if you're lucky. So you have your 90-day annual 90-day survey at the end of the quarter. And then you can do analysis, which takes another few weeks, and then you can take action. And by the time you're taking action, it's already too late, right? So the slowness of the analysis and the data part is a big problem. And then the silo data, that do you have access to all of these systems? Do you have access to take HRS, ERP products that you're implementing and so on, and just getting that data together? And then just getting the time to move faster. Because by the time you know that there is an issue, it's already becoming a big problem. So what do we want to do here? Some of the key parts when we think about analysis and reporting is to think about this from a vertical integration perspective. So try and not have too many different point solutions and destinations that you have to lift and shift between. Think about how can you vertically integrate all of these workflows into one. So if you're doing communications, for example, try to do feedback in the same platform, and then you can do analysis and reporting in the same platform. So not having like 27 different tools that you use this for, but how can you vertically integrate? That drastically increases data quality, because when you have data moving between different platforms, different solutions, that's where you're seeing the drop, because there's always something going wrong, and then you're going to combine it with something else, and it doesn't work together as naturally as it does when it's vertically integrated. And then generating these dashboards like change impact assessments, when you spoke about that, that's an example of where a lot of times it's about being like inputting in Excel sheets and doing that manually, and many times very subjective based on the change manager, like how it's going to impact and so on. This is where you can actually do that. If you're planning out everything you're going to do for a year, for example, say you're planning the communications, the training, everything that is going out, you can use that to then auto-generate a dashboard of like who's impacted when, in what way are they impacted, and so on. So if you plan it out in advance, you can get that data back. And then also in hindsight, of course, as well, when you see what has happened and then seeing what type of impact and when they're impacted. So you can draw this data and generate these dashboards from the work that you're already doing from an execution point of view, as opposed to manually populating it first and then going and execute, if that makes sense. So if you already have the execution, that would automatically generate these dashboards. Any of you have put your fingers into MCP servers? Any of you have started with MCP? Take that as a no. No from Lisa. So MCP is Model Context Protocol. So Model Context Protocol is a server which allows AI to connect with different data sources. So if you're doing AI reporting, for example, and you want to connect that to different data sources, files, like tools, like literally anything. So think of having like all your data sources in a data lake, and then you will connect that to like Power BI and maybe also other workflows. Think of it as like multi-connecting spider web in a way. An MCP server is what allows you to do that. So without an MCP server, you need to make all of these connections one-to-one, and you need to make all of these integrations separately, which is very time-consuming, very complicated, and very hard to do. What an MCP server does is that it allows you to use, from an AI perspective, you can connect with all the different tools, all the different data lakes at once, and produce all of these dashboards as well. So you can generate them. So this is, again, when you find your IT friend, have a chat with them about MCP servers, and if it's something that you're already using in your organization and something that you have access to, because it just makes the auto-generated dashboards and the visualization so much easier. So you can see pattern recognition. So as an example, if we look at analysis and reporting and connecting it, and this is where those MCP servers and having access to data lakes and so on becomes important, because it needs to be cross-functional data, right? So if we take an example of connecting reporting across many different functions, take something like a pulse survey. that you're using. Then you might have some leadership communication, and then you have your real-time feedback channels, not a 90-day survey type of channel, but a real-time feedback channel. If you put this data together, then you can see an alert being triggered. Say you have like a leadership update going out, like the CMO is leaving or something. You can then see immediately based on the real-time feedback channels that, oh, we have a drop in sentiment here. This is something that's happening live. And then you can use AI to see what are the concerns, what are people saying. So again, really important with feedback loops. What are people saying? What are they talking about? What are the key concerns and the themes? And then you can automatically create a response to those concerns that come up around that leadership transition. And then you can see, again, like if sentiment is then going back to baseline in the next 24 hours. So this is an example of how you can combine when you have the data from different places. And that's why data lakes, MCP servers, having all of that connected makes this a whole lot easier. Okay, so based on those 5, let's do another poll. Where would you start first out of these 5 that we've spoken about? Which sounds like a good place to start to you? Amazing, Maria. Having access to the data is the very first point. Okay, we have answers in. So a lot of you would start with communications, the drafting and personalization, stakeholder management being a second. So those seems to be very clear. So very much aligned with where you're spending most of your time as well, and getting those right. Awesome. That's great to see. So before we wrap for Q&A, just a couple of things to look out for. And this ties into what we've spoken about. So 3 things I would recommend. One is looking at how can you be more vertically integrated in the work that you do. That is the number one thing that helps with everything automation, everything AI, everything that you want to do faster, better. How can you be more vertically integrated? So by avoiding this kind of like what's called like a Frankenstack of just like tons of different disconnected point solutions, different tools. Like you have one tool that creates video, for example, then you have another survey tool for employee sentiment, then something else for something else. Like the more disconnected your tools are, the harder it is to do these things. So try to find vertically integrated platforms that can do all of this together. And then find friends in IT. You need technical people for this. It's not something that not all of you can go out and set up an MCP server and make this work, right? So make friends with IT and work very closely with them. And coming back to that, don't automate the chaos, right? Like select what is it that we should stop doing, run some anti-pilots, we should just not do this anymore. And then think about where do we need more human intervention, more human judgment, and maybe don't automate those things in the first place. But what is that in the middle? The things in the beautiful, chaotic, messy middle that you need to do, but where human doesn't add value, that's where you want to start automating, right? And some of the things to get started, pick one repetitive workflow that you absolutely hate and focus on making that work first. Figure out the access to data lakes, so have that conversation with IT, what data can you get your hands on and how can you start working with that? And just start connecting like 2 data sources to begin with, for example. So try and find a quick win that saves like, usually it's like an hour a day, like something you spend an hour a day on. That's a really, really good initial ROI and win that you can make, and just focus on automating that first. And something that people forget is they don't look at their baseline metrics first. So they just start doing something and then they don't have a comparison. So if you're thinking about scaling things like this across your organization, across other teams, really good to have those baseline metrics when you then build a business case to drive it further. And make friends with IT. Always good to have those on your side. And some of the tools we've spoken about, so ChatGPT projects, really helpful for that stakeholder tracking, analysis, and any kind of AI that you use for like content. Zapier is one where you can connect and automate different workflows without doing any coding. So you can connect different apps and do workflow automation with Zapier. Slack integrations or Teams integrations, whatever you use, there's a lot of tools that can integrate directly with your communications environments. Again, removing that reliance on email, for example, and having a connection. Say if you have Zapier connecting to the CRM, delivering a message in Microsoft Teams or Slack at that time. And then you have activation platforms like Tigerhall, for example, which is built to do all of this vertically integrated at scale, that brings it all together. So a little bit like how Tigerhall works, for example, in all of this, what we do is it's a platform where you create all of this personalized bite-sized content based on different audiences. So everything is exactly what people need based on their WIFMs and what their audience personas are. And then automating that delivery, automating all of the reinforcements wherever they work, if it's in Teams or Slack or anywhere else, it gets reinforced and delivered at the time that they take a certain action or do something specific. So you can get very specific with those triggers. So if we talk about ERP or HRIS, delivering it exactly at the right time. And then you get that feedback instantly that leads to all of this data and insights and reporting that you can make. And then that data also feeds into more personalization, better audience targeting, and so on, so that you can do this at very large scale, and being able to do that effectively with AI, with automation, and not spending all of that manual time on many of these things. So it helps our customers move time to launch from months to days, reducing workload massively, reducing external services spend on consulting firms, translations, and similar. Being able to do this with small teams. We many times work with teams that are 2 or 3 people, like very, very tiny teams, and then it massively improves engagement as well. So where you might have a 7 to 8% engagement on email, we have a 78% engagement rate across our customers. So that's an example of a tool that you can use in many of these areas as well. And looking at what success looks like, if you're doing these 5 workflows differently, doing it right, launch times tend to reduce around 90%. So you should get to around like 90% faster. You should save around 80% of your time on content creation when you do this right. And also one thing that many don't think about is the stakeholder visibility, because you actually, with the use of AI automation and data, you actually get much better visibility as well. And people can see what is happening, where are we going right, where are we going wrong, what's working, what isn't working. And that entire stakeholder conversation becomes so much more legit when you have all of this data to back it up, right? So the stakeholder visibility or stakeholder engagement, you should see about an 85% increase in their insight into change adoption as well. So that's what good looks like across these 5 different areas. So to recap, so 5 key workflows that you can start automating. You have the stakeholder management, communications, training, support, reinforcement, the just-in-time delivery, and then the analysis and reporting. And try and avoid having this Frankenstein, so many different disconnected tools. Don't automate the chaos without streamlining what you should automate first, and be friends with IT again. And then to get started, just pick one repetitive workflow that you might want to get started with, and then pick up like different AI tools that you might already have, and then connect the data sources. So data is your absolute best friend in this. And focus on automating the work so that you can focus on the people. We want to be more human and spend more time with humans. That's what makes us happy in general. So let's try and do that. So that's what I wanted to share. Open for any questions. I think we don't have as much time, and I took most questions throughout. But feel free to share any questions in the chat now, and we'll get back to you, or in the Q&A, and feel free to contact me as well. So you can always email me directly on nelly@tigerhall.com with any questions that you have, or any deep dive that you want to make into specific workflows, or follow-up questions, and what are the right questions to ask your IT, for example, or what are the right prompts, and all of this. Always very happy to share with any of you. So let me know how we could be helpful, and thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate you.